we wanted to talk through a couple of ways to measure just how concentrated a market is. You can think about this as being a measure of the amount of concentration by producers in the market. At one end of the extreme, we've got a monopolist, where they have all the power of the seller side concentrated into a single firm, versus a perfectly competitive market, where there's absolutely no concentration of power, right? We have so many players, so many producers, that each individual producer has no ability to influence the market. How do we measure where we are between those two extremes? We're going to go through two of them. The first is called the four-firm concentration ratio, or the C4. We've got some notation here, and we want to define that. SI is equal to the sales of the ith largest firm. So over here, where I see S1, that's the sales of the number one firm in the industry. S2, S3, S4, those are the sales of the top second, third, and fourth largest firms in the industry. ST is equal to the total sales in the market, right? So we're taking the sales of the top four largest firms and dividing them by the total sales in the industry. The C4 is going to tell us what percentage of our sales come from the top four firms in the market. We can do a little bit of algebra, and if we redefine WI to be equal to SI divided by ST, then what WI represents is the market share. What percentage of total sales come from a given firm? And again, we could rewrite this C4 as W1 plus W2 plus W3 plus W4. The C4 is a really simple measure. It just simply tells us what percentage of sales come from the top four firms. The C4 has some problems with it, right? So you can think about how if S1 grew by $100 and S2 shrank by $100, if my numerator isn't going to change. And so my C4 wouldn't change, even though I just described a scenario where the biggest firm in the market got bigger at the expense of the other two. It sounds like that's increased inequality, but this four-firm concentration ratio not going to capture that. So another way to measure market concentration that isn't subject to a little bit of misinterpretation from distributional changes is this thing called the Herfindahl-Hirschman Index, the HHI. Another little bit of a notation to talk through. The HHI uses WIs. Maybe you've seen this before, but it's been a while. We've got some summation notation, so we're doing I equals 1 all the way through T. We're not just going to stop at the top four firms, but we're going to look at every single firm in the market. What are we going to do? We're going to look at their market share, their WI, and square it. We're going to total up the square of all the market shares for all of the firms in the market, and then multiply that value by 10,000. So we've got some hypothetical data. Really simple example, right? So we've got 6 firms in the market, and the total firms in the market, total sales in the market, 2,500. Think of that as thousands of dollars or millions of dollars. I don't know what it is. Top firm, 1,000 out of 2,500. Number 2 firm in the market, 500 out of the total of 2,500. Market share, the WIs, are simply taking the sales of the individual firm and dividing it by the total firm in the by the total sales of all the firms in the market. The C4, right, is the sales of the top 4 firms divided by the total sales in the market, or alternatively, we can add up the market share of the 1, 2, 3, 4 largest firms. Number 1 firm in the market has 40% market share, second has 20, third 16, and the 4th largest firm in the market has a market share of 12%. If I total those all up, I get a value of 0.88, and I interpret that as saying 88% of the sales in the market come from my top 4 firms, or the top 4 firms in the market generate 88% of the market. The HHI, right, working through this equation up here, what we're going to do is we're going to take the market share not just for the top 4 firms, but for all of the firms. So I've got 0.4, 0.2, 0.16, 0.12, 0.08, and 0.04. I'm looking at all of the market shares, and what am I doing? I'm going to square each of those market shares and then add them all up. Multiply that value by 10,000, and we end up with a number of 2,480. One of the downsides of the HHI, it's a better approximation of distributional changes in inequality or distributional changes in concentration, But one of the unfortunate things about the HHI is, gosh, that number doesn't mean anything, right? It's just simply an index. I know that if it's higher, it represents increased concentration, but I don't know specifically what that value tells me itself. It doesn't have a good natural interpretation. So what I'd suggest you to do is stop and think about, at one end of the spectrum, when we have complete concentration and we have a monopolist, think about what the C4 and the HHI, what those values would be if we had a monopolist. And then at the other end of the extreme, think about perfect competition, where we have no concentration of power, where there's no market concentration. We've got 1,000,000 small firms that are each competing, and everybody is so small. Well, if everybody's really small, then think about what that would produce in terms of a C4 and an HHI.